chances before you. One by one we will take you.
All right. So, David, this is a top 5.
A top 5, which for us is a top 10.
Oh, that's true. I'd forgotten because you do 5 and I do 5.
That's right.
Science fiction, horror.
Yes.
We haven't done one of these in a long time.
Uh-huh.
And I was trying to come up with an idea the other day, and I thought, what about modern classics? Horror or science fiction films that have come out in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
So that excludes anything prior that you think are destined to become a classic. If not already a classic, they could already be one.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it made sense. It was hard for me, much harder than I thought it would be, looking into it, because even though it's only, well, first of all, 23 years of content and trying to find what top 5 out of that are. And so I think it came down to how what each of us used to cull down our lists. For me, it was not what I am predicting will be a classic based on populist thoughts or whatever, but what I think personally should be a classic. So that's how I first garnered it. If I was just going on what was popular, several of the movies that are in my no, this should never be a classic list would probably be picked.
I gotcha.
So
like Zack Snyder.
Zack Snyder, James Cameron. But what I did do was say, okay, so it's classics that I think will become classics. And then what's that criteria? And I basically had a list of like 75 freaking movies.
That blows my mind because I only had 23. But
And then my first call went down to, well, remember, okay, so tell you the first call. The first call was, okay, I hate to do it. I know it doesn't work, but I'm going to eliminate all MCU. So no MCU.
Marvel.
Right. Okay. And that immediately got me down to 25.
Oh, wow.
Well, no MCU, and also take away all those could have been a prediction. It's not a prediction. It's just what I think will be classic. Then I said only ones that I have seen, because there are a few on the list of sci-fi great movies of the past 20 years that I have not seen. I've never seen Donnie Darko. So, but it's on a lot of people's best sci-fi lists.
Is that 2000s? I thought that was the 90s.
No, I think it was early 2000, like 2001, 2002. And I have never seen Primer, which was another one that was on like a lot of people's sci-fi lists.
Yeah.
I went, damn. So now they've elevated up in my, need to be seen list.
Well, you need to bump those to context in this. That's what I would do. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But then what I ended up with those last 20 that I was culling down to our top 5.
Wow.
I had 2 directors who had 3 films each, and I had 2 directors with 2 films each in my like top 20. And I went, wow, okay, so obviously this. And when it finally comes out, one of those directors has 2 films in my top 5. So that says a lot about him.
Okay.
So that's been my criteria. So I have my top 5. I also have some, honorable mentions that I wish were on the list that almost made it. And then I have a scant list of, oh, please God, don't make these classics, because they aren't. It's like, don't make this a classic. Anyway.
Well, my criteria was somewhat similar. I basically just feel like these movies should be classics, or like destined to become classics. I did not have as many as you. I went through each year from 2001 going forward, or whatever, 2000 going forward, and just I eyeballed it. And I picked 23 that were my favorite. Well, that's basically what this list has turned out to be. Probably my favorite horror movies of the 21st century.
Probably, yeah. That was mine too.
And then I called it down, as you said, to 6, and I had a lot of trouble figuring out which one to cut out of the 5. So I will point that out when I get to it. But
okay.
So that was my criteria, or my way of working things.
Excellent.
Let
the countdown begin.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
Number 5 on my list is a little film called Wall-E. It was directed by Andrew Stanton. It came out in 2008. I have watched this movie numerous times and will always watch it. It has such core science fiction values that I love and tells such a great story all the way through. It's well directed. It's, even though it is an animated film, it's Pixar, so it deserves all the praise it could get. Well directed, great voice acting, incredible story. And it definitely should be a science fiction classic of the 21st century.
No, I totally agree. I absolutely love that movie.
Yep.
And we've covered it on the podcast. I have a feeling we've probably covered a lot of these on the podcast.
It's your sister, Cheryl!
My number 5 is a little indie film from 2014 called It Followed. It was written and directed by David Robert Mitchell and starred a fresh face named Maika Monroe, who is now becoming quite popular in movie land out there. And it's about a young woman who is stalked by a supernatural entity after a sexual encounter.
Yep.
And this movie just has influence. It just is swelling with influence. It's the whole slasher motif of being stalked, but it's also an entity that you can identify because it can be anybody. You just don't know who it is until they get really close.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't get rid of it until you have sex with someone else and pass it on. I just think the concept alone is so original.
Yeah, it's AIDS, it's every STD blown up to this horrible, insidious, won't stop. And I love that movie.
I do too. As a matter of fact, we did it early on in the podcast, and I'm considering it for a redux now.
Well, they're doing a sequel. So yeah,
they sure are. They're doing a sequel. They're working on it right now. Both the director and Maika are coming back. So we'll see.
I agree with that. I think that's good.
Silent breed is people!
My number 4, it comes from 2015. And when you can have a very, very, very popular science fiction dystopian franchise and make some incredible films, and then 30 years later want to come back and do a sequel, you're a good man. And that's who George Miller is. And that's why Fury Road is my number 4.
Oh, wow.
I think this movie should be a classic for practical effects, for photography, sound design, world building, acting, everything. Even though you changed out, and also, you changed out your lead character. Another actor is playing your lead, but it still works. And still,
it's great. And you were naming all those things it's known for. They were also, I believe, nominated for Academy Awards for those things as well. Yeah. I mean, it was a very highly awarded
cinematography, action, choreography. Yeah. I mean, I think Charlize was incredible in it. Tom Hardy's great in it. It's just a great movie. It is a science fiction classic of the 21st century.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody touched nothing.
My number 4 is a little film from 2017 called Get Out. This one, of course, was written and directed by, a lot of mine were all written and directed by. Only one of them wasn't.
Auteur stories, yes.
I did notice that. Written and directed by Jordan Peele. It stars Daniel Kaluuya, Allison Williams, Catherine Keener, Bradley Whitford. This is the one that brings racial tensions into Stepford Wife country, about a young African-American who visits his white girlfriend's parents for the weekend, where his simmering uneasiness about the reception of him eventually becomes very valid. And I even went back and rewatched this the other day because I was trying to decide about this one too. And it is beautiful. It is a gorgeous film and disturbing, and it's a classic. It is.
Come with me if you want to live.
My number 3 is a little film, and it's one that probably some sci-fi fans have not seen, but should see, and should be a classic. And it came out in 2014, written and directed by Alex Garland, and it's called Ex Machina. And I remember pushing this on us to do, because when I first saw the movie, it was so good, I watched it again right after I saw it the first time. It stars Alicia Vikander, I think is her name. Some people say Vikander, but I don't know. Denholm Gleeson, Oscar Isaac. And it is an intense examination of AI and Turing testing, robotics, incredible photography, great acting, good special effects that are some shots in it. I go, I still don't know how you did that shot. That's really incredibly well done. But
Great writing, Alex Garland.
yes, Alex Garland is just really good as a writer and a director. And so, yeah, it became my number 3. I think
It's definitely up there. We covered that early on too on the podcast, and I had never seen it, and I really enjoyed it.
yeah, it's really good.
Ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?
My number 3, speaking of Alex Garland, is a little film from 2002 called 28 Days Later. This is Danny Boyle's entry into horror. He's kind of an eclectic director that directs various types of films, but this one was the introduction, really, of fast zombies. You never saw them before this movie, and I think it's probably one of the best. It was written by Alex Garland, stars Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harry, and a wonderful Brendan Gleeson, who is one of my favorite character actors. It's about a bicycle courier who wakes up from a coma to find that society has collapsed due to the accidental release of a contagious virus called rage. And the zombies in this movie are terrifying because they are fast.
Wow, we could not have. We don't talk about this prior, folks. We're a very unscripted podcast. That is amazing because Denholm, his son, was in my movie. And that is just crazy that it's the same writer and the same family.
The same family of actors were in, Ex Machina and 28 Days Later.
And to be able to write something like 28 Days, which is post-apocalyptic, essentially, post-outbreak, rabid, awful zombies, and then go to this very heady, intellectual, we're going to sit around and talk about what makes humans story, that's great. That's really cool.
I knew that you had some multiple directors, but it's funny that we have multiple writers too.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now I'm curious what you're going to do for 2 and 1, because 28 Days Later is a horror classic.
It is.
It goes up there with Night of the Living Dead, Psycho. All of these great classics. So now I'm curious.
The Force will be with you, always.
My number 2, this one came up as soon as you said classics that of the 21st century. This was the first one that occurred to me. Our second one that occurred to me. Not number 1 is my number 1 that occurred to me, but number 2. But I started to punt it because it's one of the 2 directors, but I didn't because I really liked it and liked the influence, even on the rewatches that we've done for the podcast and everything else. But it's by Denis Villeneuve. Came out in 2016. It's called Arrival.
Oh, yes.
It's such an underrated, I think, science fiction film, but it is so good and so well done. It was written by Eric Heisner and Ted Chiang, and they went on to do some other stuff. I was looking it up and trying to see. Division by Zero was another one that Chiang did. That was another underrated science fiction film, but very low budget. This one, it has such huge topics in it of benevolent extraterrestrials. How do you communicate with an alien race? What's the future of humanity? How do we react? What do we do? And then it throws in like 2 or 3 twists that are incredible and amazing. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I think I remember you liked it too when we saw it.
Oh, I did. It's the whole, I don't want to give away the plot. but
there are twists that
the
are
structure of the story. Let's just say that.
Yep. So that's my number 2, Arrival.
That's your number 2. Well, you mentioned you were interested in what my number 1 and 2 are going to be, and they are going to be controversial. I can tell you that much.
Okay.
Why are you torturing me like this?
My number 2 is a film from 2019 called Midsommar.
Not controversial to me.
No, I think this is a gorgeous movie and literally thought classic the first time I viewed it. I was
Yep.
like blown away. It was written and directed by Ari Aster, who also did Hereditary, which was also a contender for things in this list, for classic in this list. It stars Florence Pugh and Jack Rayner, and it is a folk horror film about a group of college students who travel to Sweden for a pagan midsummer festival and become involved in a terrifying event. And I will leave it at that. This movie, it strikes me as a classic in many ways, like its predecessor, The Wicker Man, which is clearly what it was influenced by, because it all takes place just about in daylight. It is bright and colorful and not a dark, creepy horror movie like you would expect, and yet it is still terrifying. So
Yeah. The thing that I love most about Midsommar is by about 15 minutes into it, you are so obsessed with looking all over the screen at what could happen and what is happening. And he takes these long pastoral moving shots and things are going on in the background and you're going, what's going on? I don't want it just feeling of dread from like the prologue on. Yeah, I totally agree. Now I can see Midsommar, but you already, I don't know. Anyway.
So yeah, that's my number 2.
See what's on the slab.
My number 1, I'm sure, is no surprise to you, no surprise to anybody who has listened to us on the podcast and everything else, and hopefully no surprise to anybody who's watched movies for the past 20 years. It is Dune, and I have not seen part 2 of Dune, so this is based on part 1 of Dune, which I found to be a brilliant science fiction adaptation of the novel. It was written by Denis Eric Roth and John Spaeth, I think is his name. Directed by Denis Villeneuve, Timothy Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, and Zendaya, among others, are in it. It has the best Hans Zimmer score that I have ever heard. It has some of the most incredible photography and cinematography of a science fiction film in the past 20 years. And very similar, in fact, to one that didn't make my list, but was another Denis Villeneuve film, which is Blade Runner 2049. So,
I figured you might cut it because it was a sequel.
Well, yeah, but it was brilliant as well. Denis is the new and upcoming. I think the same way Jordan Peele and several others have jumped onto the horror bandwagon. Denis Villeneuve is science fiction. He is the new science fiction maestro, I think, going back to like Spielberg and Kubrick. Well, Kubrick only had 2001 and AI, but yeah, that's my number 1. Dune cannot be denied.
I agree. It's a great film, and another one we covered on our podcast very recently. It was our finale to last season.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so that just came
and
out.
I'm looking forward to 2.
Ago.
Everybody says if you liked 1, 2's even better. I'm like, oh wow, can't imagine that, but we'll see.
Dun dun dun.
Drum
My
roll,
number
please.
1 is a movie from 2015 called The Witch. This one,
okay, that surprised me.
It does. Why?
Wow. No, say why, and then I'll talk. Yeah.
Well, it's written and directed by Robert Eggers, another one of those auteurs that you're talking about in the horror world, just like Ari Aster and Jordan Peele.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first thing I can recall seeing Anya Taylor-Joy in. She is now a superstar. She was in The Queen's Gambit and other things. But it also stars Ralph Ineson, who I'm starting to see in everything, and Kate Dickie, both English actors. It is about a Puritan family in the 1630s, New England, who encounter a witch after their newborn son goes missing and their crops fail. And that's basically the story. Yeah. And the reason, and I told you this is going to be controversial because a lot of people don't like Midsummer. A lot of people don't like The Witch. The Witch is a very small story in a small setting, big wilderness, but small farm. Very few characters. and absolutely terrifying. And you know what's going on almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And it harkens back to things like The Crucible, which was the Arthur Miller's play.
Mm-hmm.
And it harkens back to the Salem witch trials, but it's supernatural because it's a real witch. It's just awesome. It's a classic. I don't know how to say it anymore.
I would agree with you. My stunnedness was not because I don't agree with you. I think it's a classic. It's that it's curious that you didn't go for like Hereditary, which it would be on a lot of people's lists, I think. But that would put you with two Ari Asters, right?
No, I didn't want two Aries, and I picked Midsommar because I think it's superior to Hereditary.
And a lot of people, I think that's controversial. I think a lot of people would disagree with you about that.
There's a few things that are nonsensical in Hereditary that bother me, even though I love it.
And The Witch is, again, a very tense, slow burn, terrifying, and it continues Crucible-esque moments, like you said, where you're watching something you really don't feel comfortable watching. You shouldn't watch this family implode like this, and you should just step out of the room. But he holds on it and makes you keep watching. You don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. And I love the fact that he keeps that. We don't know the truth until the very end, which was great.
And I love a slow burn. I know a lot of people don't. They want fast, in-your-face horror. But if you look, I mean, out of the ones I picked, it follows Midsommar and The Witch are probably the only slow burns. 28 Days Later is fast. It is very fast. Oh, yeah. And Get Out is just moderately paced.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Correct. But yeah, I'm like you, though, and people know who listen to us that we both like slow burns anyway. I mean, I would take The Witch any day over The Conjuring or any of its sequels or anything else or all these slash and gash burn movies that are out. So
yeah, and also I ranked. You were probably surprised that 28 Days Later wasn't number one because I'm such a zombie fan. Yeah, but I rank these the way I felt they are visually as a classic. And Midsommar is a very visual movie, but to me, The Witch is even better because it is all natural lighting, beautiful cinematography.
Yeah, I think I said on the podcast, it's the Barry Lyndon of horror movies because everything looks like it's lit by sun or candle. And that's it. Fireplace. Yeah. Did you have honorable mentions? Do we want to do those?
I do. You want to go first since I just did one?
I'll do mine real quick because I basically have four, excluding MCU, because my struggle with the MCU was, I think there are two or three in there that should be classic science fiction films. Iron Man, particularly, should be a classic of modern science fiction making. But
I love that movie.
But I had to group it together and move it away. So the three that I have in honorable mention are Children of Men. I really wanted that to be up there, and that was my struggle. That was like my number 6, and I was going, okay, who's going to lose? It was between 5 and 6.
That's Cuarón, right?
Yeah. Alfonso Cuarón, and it's an incredibly good story, and it's very classic science fiction. So even novel, it's a very Heinlein Asimov story, harking back 1984 and George Orwell. The other one was The Martian, which is a very good novel and a very good movie.
Yeah.
And very well done, but it just didn't make my list compared to the others. The others just ranked higher than it. And the same thing goes for Minority Report, who is also by my favorite director. But it's great science fiction, and it's a really cool story, and it's well done. But it just didn't, compared to the others, it just fell down to honorable mention. So
okay. Well, my honorable mention, the very first one, is the one that I had trouble demoting from being in the top 5. It was wrestling off and on with both Get Out and It Follows. So I rewatched it, and I decided to just do a honorable mention. It came out in 2005. It's called The Descent.
Oh,
it is.
What a movie.
Yeah, it's written and directed by Neil Marshall. It's got a wonderful female ensemble cast. 6 women go to a caving expedition in the Appalachian Mountains and become trapped in an uncharted cave system with monstrous cannibal creatures.
Yes.
That's the three words that get me anyway. Monstrous cannibal creatures.
Yeah, you're grabbing the popcorn and sitting down for that.
Yeah,
I know.
exactly. Love this movie. This has just got a great script, and it could have easily. To me, it's a classic, but I don't think it's viewed as a classic in the world lens right now as much as the other ones I mentioned. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally makes sense.
Another one I think is a total classic, but it is more science fiction, is The Road from 2009. We just recently covered this on the podcast as well, directed by John Hillcoat, based on the wonderful novel by Cormac McCarthy about a father and a son journeying on foot across the post-apocalyptic United States, after an undefined extinction event has resulted in the extinction of all life on Earth, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And undefined is such a crucial part of that. That movie I had never seen. We put it on the list, and even though I should have seen it as a sci-fi genre geek guy, I had never seen it. I'd never read the novel, but that movie was so good, I immediately got the novel and read it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Cormac, right?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
McCarthy. Mm-hmm.
He's just so good at
Minimalism.
Storytelling.
Yeah.
Just telling a story from whichever POV he's dealing with, the verbiage he uses, how he tells the story. He's a great author.
Yeah, and that's a great movie. I think I told you when we covered it. It's like in my top 20 movies now.
Wow. Yeah, it is great.
And then my third honorable mention is a sequel that I can't believe this director is not in my top five, but it's Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep. I mean, you've got Mike Flanagan directing Stephen King.
As Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, kind of, as Stanley Kubrick, with homage to Stanley Kubrick. Yeah. It is a grown-up Dan Torrance, a psychic adult, struggles with alcoholism and is traumatized by his childhood at the Overlook Hotel. He must protect a younger girl with similar psychic abilities. Again, look at the pedigree. I mean, Mike Flanagan, who is probably my favorite director, and Stephen King, who is definitely my favorite writer. And it's an honorable mention.
Yeah. This says a lot about the ones you mentioned, though, and how good they are.
It does. Yeah. It does. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were talking offline a couple of weeks ago, and I said Rose the Hat is one of the best villains in a long time.
She is. And she's in Dune.
Yes, she is. Yeah. She's his mom.
Do you have context, like any of these you weeded this list down from? Because I have quite a few.
I have a few. Well, again, MCU first. So in the MCU, my favorites and the ones that I think would be up there are Iron Man, the first Avengers, Black Panther, and Infinity War. Not necessarily Endgame, but Infinity War. Mostly because of the risk they took with that movie. Ending it the way they did, how they built it up, worked really, the plotting of it. But I have a few that just kind of ground it. I've said a couple of them. Blade Runner 49 is up there. Inception, Serenity, Oblivion, which is another one you probably wouldn't like, but I would like. And one that made my list, and I was going, ooh, do I want to put that in there just because it's such a subgenre? But that was Cloverfield. Because I remember seeing that movie and hating it, but then we watched it again for the podcast.
And loved it.
This really doesn't suck, and both of us hate found footage movies.
We both hate found footage movies, and that movie took us completely by surprise with a rewatch because we were into it.
I think it's one of those that will end up making everybody's top
classic
5 list.
Yeah.
They'll say it's classic sci-fi of the 21st century. Oh, you've got to have Cloverfield in there. But yeah, those were just my contextuals. I also had District 9, which is on a lot of lists. It's a really great movie. It's really good. I just don't think it's as good as the 5.
That's Blomkamp, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
AI, going back to Kubrick, his last screenplay that Spielberg ended up doing, a good movie, but it gets bogged down in places. I don't know if it'll be a classic. It might, but not in my opinion. And one that was weirdly off kilter because it shows up on science fiction lists, although It's a very weird subgenre, and that's The Prestige. And I really wanted to put it in the top 5, but I thought compared to the others, it just didn't make it, or the honorable mention. It was
Not and it's not really sci-fi. It's more, I don't know, fantasy. I don't know what you would call it. Mystical.
Well, they say it's science fiction because they're using Tesla's technology that was never shown to anybody. But it falls into more of a mystery angle than a total science fiction. So, but well acted, well directed, good movie. So
my context were you finished? I thought you.
Yeah.
Okay. Mine, I broke it into just 2 categories, very basic: American films and foreign films, or just favorites of this 21st century. I've got Grindhouse, Hereditary, The Invisible Man. The reboot is.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
No, and it's actually more science fiction, so that might also be a reason why I didn't include it. Smile, Barbarian. A little film by Stephen King called 1922 that we have not talked about, but I've only seen it once, and I really think we need to visit it on the podcast because I remember really liking it.
That's the one with the well?
Yeah, that's Dolores Claiborne, but there may be a well in it too.
Okay. Trying to remember. Who's the lead in that? In 22?
Thomas Jane.
Yeah.
Okay, there may be a well in it,
because he's also
too.
in The Expanse. I remember that's what turned me on to it, because I was looking up The Expanse and saw his name and went, oh, wow, he's the guy from The Expanse. Let me look at that.
Yeah.
So that was a good movie.
Yeah, another one I have that I'm surprised you didn't mention is A Quiet Place. I think that's fantastic, but it's more sci-fi. Pearl, another sequel.
Oh, wow. Pearl.
Love Ty West. That's another great horror director that did not make the cut, unfortunately. Now, foreign film, I know you're not huge on foreign films, but I have some foreign films here that are solid. And the first one that almost made the list was Train to Busan.
Yep. I would agree with that.
And that's another fast zombie movie, but it's not as good as 28 Days Later. Wreck, which is Spanish, another fast zombie movie.
It's a great movie.
Found footage, Let the Right One In.
Ooh.
Very quiet little vampire film from Sweden. The Devil's Backbone, Guillermo del Toro, Spanish movie.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to Me, a recent Australian movie. The one with the hand where they hold the hand.
Yeah. I saw that in the theater, actually.
Yeah. The Babadook, which I have seen, but it's been a while. It's Australian. And then lastly, a comedy, Shaun of the Dead. It's classic.
When I told people that we were doing this, that we were compiling our lists, everybody said, well, Tim's going to do Shaun of the Dead, right? Like, that's a classic. You can't do horror classics without that.
I can't put a comedy up there in a horror classics. No. But I do love that movie.
Yeah. And that's good context. I mean, those are good foreign. Oh, every one of those is good. Of course, I haven't seen Babadook yet, so I can't tell you.
Yeah, it's on the list. We'll probably cover it soon.
I did put together a list of, please God, no, don't make these classics, even though I know you will.
Okay.
Because this showed up on so many people's lists that I was comparing to and talking to people about it. All these did, and they would bring it up, and I would go, no. First one was Avatar. Avatar is not a classic. I don't give a shit what he did with motion capture and everything else. It's a terrible movie. It's a terrible screenplay.
Oh,
it doesn't
hear
work.
about this.
And it's not good science fiction. It's not good science fiction. It's not good. Avatar's bad. The other one that came up a lot was Snowpiercer. So they even made a series out of it that is still going, and I don't see how, because
that's because the train's always going.
Yeah, the train's all terrible. Sorry, and I'm going to get a lot of flack, and people are going to talk about Interstellar. Interstellar is not a good movie. It is not good science fiction. It doesn't work. I figured it out in the first 10 minutes and went, if it's going to be loved by the end of this, I'm going to be really pissed off. And there it goes. And two that are the same genre, the same sequence as far as a trilogy goes, and the same studio, which is both Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. Please stop praising them as good Star Wars or good science fiction, because they're not. They're both terrible films that don't deserve to be on anybody's classic list. So please don't make them classic.
What about the first one?
It works for me just because it's JJ doing what JJ does best, which is looking at other people's work and saying, what are the good elements of this? I'm going to put it in it. So I'm going to go back to practical effects instead of a bunch of CGI. I'm going to create the farm boy story and the villain in black, which we had before, and then the humorous, funny sidekick. Let's do all those because they worked for New Hope. So let's do that again. So I'm not totally opposed to it. It is very retro, and it is basically a New Hope reboot. But I at least could follow it. It was passable, good storytelling and plotting all the way through. Last Jedi is a train wreck from the very beginning.
Okay.
And it's literally like Johnson said, I want to take everything that's been in the Star Wars canon and mythos and throw it out and do my own thing, which supposedly is what they're doing right now with Acolyte. A lot of fans, Star Wars fans, are upset about Acolyte. I haven't watched it.
I haven't seen it yet.
But they're saying they throw the Force out. They throw all this out. They make it a coven of witches that have created the Sith. And all
Okay,
this.
I'm in.
It's supposed to be weird. But anyway, yeah. So there you go. Our top 30.
Now, yeah, we went on a little bit with some context and some honorable mentions, but our top fives are what they are. We hope you enjoyed what we had for you today. If you've got thoughts, we'd love to hear them. There's comments down below. You can always make them. And also, we'd like to hear what your modern classic movies would be. They obviously, these are our opinions, so you are entitled to your own, and we would like to know what that is. Mm-hmm. And until next time, David, I guess I will be seeing you.
Yeah, we'll do some more tops.
Do more top five. Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.